Hi, this is Lainey from Hilltop Home Place. I'm doing a little video tonight. It's very special. When we were going through our move-in preparations, when we sold our home recently, I found a book in my husband's nightstand that I knew was there. I just had never read it. It was a notebook that his grandpa had written some gardening notes in. Now, I don't know why I forgot about that book. It had just been out of my sight, out of mind for over 20 years. So I forgot it was even in my husband's possession. I forgot all about it until I was gathering things up to pack everything to move. And there it was. And it was a black book. I knew it had information about gardening in it, but I didn't realize until I got it out and I really started reading it, and I realized everything was in an outline, and I realized at that point what it was. So I wanted to tell you about it tonight, and I wanted to just share some little vignettes from the book and show you what all it was about. And let me do that now. Let me just dive right in and show you what was in that book. It turns out this book was his class lecture notes from when he attended the Agricultural and Mechanical College of the state of Mississippi, which was Mississippi State University, as it became to be known in 1958. And that's where he went to college. He was always so proud of Mississippi State, and he majored in farming and animal husbandry. His daughter told me, who is my mother-in-law, she told me that today when I asked her what he majored in. He loved agriculture. He had so many people in his family that was in it, and it was just a natural thing for him to major in when he went to Mississippi State. And this book just contains so much information on so many things. It's just unreal. And I'm so honored to be in possession of it now and to be able to use it for my gardening. Every facet of gardening is covered in here. It gives the basis for manures, green manures, cover crops, everything you want to know about how to make your soil fertile, about how to deal with the different types of soil. It just goes into so much extensive detail, and just, I guess, the things you would expect to learn at a college course, including a recipe for how to make your own manure. And it says this is done in European countries by taking a ton of straw, 45 pounds of ammonium sulfate, 16 pounds of acidic phosphate, 45 pounds of brown limestone, and you add water to it so that it rots. And you use this mixture in greenhouses and hotbeds. That sounds fascinating. I just wanted to show these dates, 1931. And even back then, they were still debating the benefits and the bad or the good about commercial fertilizers. And I thought it was interesting to see in this book some of those things talked about. Some of the advantages, just throwing out a couple of them. The nutrients of commercial fertilizers are available. The nutrients are in a desirable proportion, and they're sold under a guaranteed analysis, and on and on and on. And it goes to give the good and the bad about commercial fertilizers. So even in 1931, they were debating these uses. And those debates still go on today, as we know, with a lot of people wanting to cut them out completely. But it goes to show there are some advantages. Of course, I perked up when I saw the little section about seeds and seed growing. It talked about how to have clean seeds, and you want to concentrate on the viability of them. And you want the seeds that are free from disease. And anytime you want to talk about seeds with me, I'm interested. I perk up. And they even talked about how the best seeds should be bought from northern houses, which surprised me since they were in the South. One of the little things I saw that I thought was interesting, it says if you use a large seed, you're going to have a small yield of crop. If you use a small seed, you're going to have a large yield of crop. But if you use a medium-sized seed, you're going to have your really best yield. It says the best yields that they found are from medium-sized seeds. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about what size seed your particular vegetable has. Here's another interesting tidbit. They're talking about irrigation, using spray irrigation, surface irrigation, or sub-irrigation, which is underground. And they recommend here to put the pipes 3 or 4 feet underground to do this sub-irrigation. I'm not sure what plants they use this for, but I thought that was very interesting that your pipes would be so far under the ground as opposed to just a few inches. They talk about a lot about insects and diseases, and that was interesting to me. But what I really got interested in after reading this just a little bit is I noticed that they brought up the idea of perennials. As you know, I did a video about perennials a few weeks ago, and I was so excited to do that. And I was also excited to see that the 3 perennials he mentions here were on my video as well as things I had picked out: asparagus, rhubarb, and kale. I ended up eliminating rhubarb because I found out the leaves were poisonous, but it's still one of those that I researched, so that was interesting to me. And he goes into great detail about several of these in his notes, and I thought that was so interesting. But he makes note here that asparagus is the most important perennial. He says it comes from Europe, and the soil that it grows the best in is a sandy loam to a heavy type of soil. He mentions that the yield of asparagus has increased, but the price has not decreased. And I find that funny because that's kind of how it is now. The price of asparagus has not decreased, no matter how much they've grown it through the years and gotten really good at growing it. In 1922 to 23, it was $4 a crate. I can tell you it's probably a lot more than that now. He mentions 3 varieties at the bottom: Martha Washington, Mary Washington, and then a variety called Palmita, if I'm reading his penmanship right. I'm not sure about that variety. I haven't looked it up yet. If you've heard of that, let me know. He goes on to talk about rhubarb and how it's grown for the leaf petiole or stem. And it says it's a native of Siberia. I did not know that. And I did not know that rhubarb belongs to the buckwheat family. I did not know that at all, even in the research I did the other night for my video. I don't remember seeing that. Artichokes weren't on the top 3, but he does go into talking about those too. He specifically mentions Jerusalem artichokes, and which I want to grow as well. And he mentions that they'll grow in good soil, bad soil, just about any soil. So I hope that I can get Jerusalem artichokes to grow in our soil here in South Louisiana. This was such a special thing to see in this book: sea kale. I mentioned that in my video the other night as one of the 2 varieties of kale that are specifically called perennials, even though a lot of kale grows like a perennial. And it says in here that the sea kale belongs to the mustard family, and that you could propagate it by cuttings of the rootstock or by seed. And you don't harvest it until after the 2nd year. So that's good to keep in mind, because most kale grows and you can harvest it within 60 days or so. But this kale, the sea kale, as a perennial, needs 2 years to harvest. I thought it was funny in this book that some of the words he spelled, like herbs, E-R-B-S, and salad, S-A-L-I-D. And he was a very good speller and a very smart person. I'm thinking that's how the professor was probably spelling it, and that might have been how they spelled it for back then. Or it could have just been a misspelling. But since he was taking notes that were written in a class, and probably off of an outline, I'm thinking that's just how they spelled it back then. But he mentions lettuce and celery and chicory and cress and corn salad here as salad crops. And I was very interested, especially in when he talked about the cress and the corn salad, because those also are perennials, and those are 2 items that I've gotten seeds for. I haven't tried growing them yet, but I do want to grow the corn salad and the cress, if I can, in our southern climate, which may or may not be able to do, but I do want to try it because I want to grow some really good perennial greens to have in my garden. And he mentions both of those in here. They move on to cold crops: cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, Chinese cabbage, collard greens, a lot of the same things that are still prominently grown now. I thought it was interesting he brought up kohlrabi. They had that on their outline, and grown in Europe and cultivated like cabbage. It's just that this vegetable to be in his notes from 1931 surprised me, because even today, it really has not gained a huge following. So I thought that was interesting. Carrots, of course, everybody loves carrots. They're native of Europe. And he talks about how Mississippi was ranked 4th in production of carrots, which I thought was unusual. I just never have associated Mississippi as being a high state for production of carrots. They mentioned bulb crops and mentioned that onions are the first crop in the bulb crops, and that West Texas is first in the nation and California second in production. I'm thinking that might still be pretty much true. The book goes on to a big section about gardens and how to design them. Informal gardens, formal gardens, Italian gardens, French gardens, Dutch gardens, English gardens. They teach them everything in those courses. They even teach them how to do drawings of the gardens and show them the different things you use to represent the different types of trees or plants. And so they knew everything. They were learning the whole agricultural thing in this one spring semester. The whole back of the book was devoted to intense notes on several different topics. This first one was grapes. It was just page after page after page showing you how to grow grapes. And it's fascinating because that can be very tricky, and I have all these notes right at my disposal. It had a section on muscadine grapes. It had a section on pruning grapes, just everything you want to know. Then did the same thing with pears. It did the same thing with figs. It talked about strawberries and how to grow those. It talked about just growing fruit trees in general. Then it went into peaches. It talked all about peaches, apples. Everything you wanted to know about all of these fruits are just right there in this book. So I'm so excited, and I'm so excited that I get to use this book. So I guess you understand now why I was so excited to have found this little book. It's kind of like I get to take a free course at Mississippi State. It's like I get to share the knowledge that a college course taught, and just I can do it in my own time, at my own pace. I love it. I especially like those sections at the ends on how to grow the fruit trees, the grapes, the peaches, the apples, the pears, the figs. It's just that information is going to be invaluable to me, because I have admitted that on this channel before, that I have a little bit of a problem with getting interested in growing trees. I want to do it. I love the fruit and the figs and all that come off of those trees. I love them. But I just always tend to focus a little more on vegetables, and I don't focus a lot on trees. But I think that's because I really just haven't had a repository of information at my fingertips. I hear how people grow them. I see things on little videos and all, but I need sometimes information in one spot that I can refer to pretty easy. And I think this little notebook is going to be hopefully a big help to just give me information at my fingertips and motivate me to try to grow some of these trees using those tips on my new property. So, but even the information about the perennials and vegetables and soils and all kind of things in there. There was a lot I didn't even cover because I just didn't want the video to last forever. But it went into great detail about soils. It went into great detail about fertilizers. It went into great detail, a lot more than I showed, about the manures. They talked about green manures and cover crops. It was just a treasure trove of information. Like I said, it was like taking a whole course at Mississippi State, except I've just glanced through it so far, and I've done this video to show you some information. But it's a lot to study, and I'm going to take my time and really learn the things in that book over the course of years. We'll have it forever. I'm probably going to take my time, and when I get my home set up and I get my printer back set up, I'm going to actually take that book and make copies of each page, or I can really fit 2 pages on my copier at one time because the book's not that big. And then I'm going to compile that into a notebook and use that to peruse through all the time, because the book itself is pretty frail and it's starting to kind of tear apart, and I don't want to have it just completely tear apart on me. I'd like to keep it as intact as I can. So I'll probably make me a little book out of a folder, just using printed copies that I'm going to make. So his legacy will live on through our gardening, and we'll hopefully grow things that he learned how to grow when he was at Mississippi State. He always had a garden after that. As a matter of fact, he had several different jobs in his life. He worked very, very hard. But one of his jobs was an overseer at a big farm. And he loved that job. He loved it. I didn't get to know him till he was later in life and already retired. But I can tell you, he would tell stories all the time about working at that farm and being the overseer and all the people that worked with him. He absolutely loved that job. They moved to Meridian later than that, and he ended up working in plants and factories around Meridian. But his heart was always in those farming jobs that he did before. And many of his family went into farming. I have some family tree information on them. And sons, daughters, everybody was into farming. They married farmers. They farmed all around Mississippi and Alabama. They have that belt of soil that went through Mississippi and Alabama that was a really dark, rich, loamy soil. And a lot of the farming community gravitated towards those areas of Mississippi and Alabama to farm. And he was part of that movement for a while before he moved to the city. And his family did that for many, many years too. So happy to have found this book from Richard's grandpa. And it's just like getting to visit with him again and getting to see what he was passionate about. And he was passionate about gardening. They spent many, many years growing things, putting up food. They ate what they grew. I just vividly remember them in the kitchen all day long, putting up squash. She didn't pressure can things like we do today. Mostly they did a lot of freezing. They would get the little white boxes that were kind of plastic coated for the freezer, and they would cook a lot of the squash and things and freeze it in those boxes. And she would just pop a box out to go with their meal at night of this and that. And that's the way they kind of did it. They had a couple of extra freezers in their kitchen. And I can remember them always walking by those freezers and touching the doors during the daytime to make sure those doors were shut and the seal on those freezers was closed, to make sure the seal hadn't been broken, that some child or grandchild had not walked by and opened those freezers. They were constantly checking them because that held money for them. That held their groceries that they had worked hard for and put back. And so it was like money was in those freezers. And I'll never forget that. I learned so much from them. They were truly great people. And I'm so glad we found this book. This is Lainey from Hilltop Home Place. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Y'all have a great evening. Bye-bye.